Welcome everybody to another episode of DNS Unfiltered. Today I'm joined by the founder and CEO of SquareDot, which is a B2B marketing firm that specializes in MSPs but has longer reach than that. Ian Blake, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mikey.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So a little bit about me professionally. As you can see from the lack of hair on my head, I've been around a long time.
And gray beard.
Yeah, exactly. So I've lifelong B2B tech sales and marketing. I started my career in Xerox in sales and then moved to mobile telco and worked in enterprise sales, SMB sales, and sales management, and also in marketing within those companies. And I suppose it was within my last telco role. I ran B2B marketing for a brand you guys in the States are probably not familiar with. They're called Three. So they're reasonably large in Europe, in Ireland, and the UK for sure. They sponsor Chelsea Football Club, if that resonates with any of your.
You mean soccer, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it was while there, I went looking for a specialist B2B tech marketing agency in Ireland and couldn't find any, and we had to go to the UK to get an agency to work with us, and that kind of sowed the seed for me going, oh, there could be an opportunity here. And that's where the idea for SquareDot was born. And I set up a business 10 years ago. And in that time, we've worked with, like I was explaining earlier, we could break our clients into two buckets. 10% of our business are global B2B companies or B2B tech companies. An example that your audience might be familiar with are OtterBox, the mobile phone and iPad cover people based out of California. We do all of their B2B EMEA marketing for them, but they're only 10%, or them and others are 10% of our business. 90% of our business are mid-market B2B tech companies, and a large percentage of those are MSPs. We typically work.
Yes, I personally spent way too much money on OtterBox cases, so your marketing is working, Ian. So if you haven't noticed, Ian has a pretty killer Irish accent. But I am curious, like not necessarily what percentage of your customers are based in like UK, Ireland, and Europe, but versus the US. But well, I guess that, and what are some of the differences you've seen like between MSPs and the different geolocations?
Yeah. I suppose the differences in the geolocations are, they're kind of, well, I suppose they all have very similar challenges, right? And the problems that we solve are similar. Obviously the market in the US is much bigger than the UK or Ireland. So those clients, those US-based MSPs would have, or tech companies just have a much bigger market to go after. But in the main, the problems are the same, challenges are the same, issues are the same. And one thing I find having worked with so many MSPs at this point is actually how different they are when you get to speak to them. But they don't show that differentiation.
Well, let's talk about that first. Yeah. Like I've seen one of your videos and you mentioned the Sea of Sameness in the MSP marketing. Yeah. And like you just said, MSPs are rather unique once you get to talk to them, but that uniqueness rarely comes out in their marketing. What is the hang up there?
Yeah, I don't think it's a hang up. I think it's a behavioral it's behavioral within the makeup of people that own and run and sit on leadership teams of MSPs. They're typically logical, left brain people, and where logic is great for solving the technical problems of their clients, replacing hyper-converged infrastructure systems and uh, putting in cloud solutions, etc. Logic has a great way of getting you to the same place as your competitors. Um, and there's a lovely story I heard recently, actually talking about logic, and the importance of not copying your competition. So there's a book written by a guy called Will Guidara, and Will Guidara owns a restaurant in New York called 11 Madison Park, and they were number 50 on a list of restaurants, and they wanted to get to number one. So what they did, Will Guidara brought his team. He's written a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, and he brought his team, so kitchen staff, front of house staff, etc., to the restaurant that became number one on that list. And they were all sitting down having a meal, and the staff, and the meal arrived and the service was there, and the staff were talking about, well, what they could bring back to 11 Madison Avenue. And Will Guidara says, no, I don't want you to copy what's good. I want us to see what's bad about this number one restaurant, and let's bring those things back, right? And the two things that they thought they weren't necessarily bad, but they weren't as good as the other things, were their beer wasn't outstanding. So they had two beer options, and that the beer drinkers at the table were kind of treated like second class citizens. That the wine sommelier was kind of looking down their nose at them, right? And then the other thing they didn't do well, relevant to the other stuff, was coffee, right? So the two takeaways that they took was that they were going to implement in 11 Madison Avenue. They're going to double down on beer, and they're going to double down on coffee. And what they did was that they got a beer sommelier and a wine sommelier, and they got so someone who was really into craft beers in 11 Madison Avenue, and he doubled down on his beer knowledge. And the restaurant was so good anyway, they were number 50 on the list, remember, that craft beer companies were practically giving
Yeah.
them the beer for nothing. And anyway, long story short is that they went from number 50 on this list to number one on this list, because they over-indexed on the thing that their competition weren't good at. And he has coined a phrase in the book, which I
Mm.
love, called reverse benchmarking. And it's the opposite of what the likes of McKinsey and Bain and all of these large consultancy companies, they make a fortune out of benchmarking the competition, right? And similar, going back to my original point about the logical kind of senior leadership teams in what make MSPs great, right? But that logic, the same as Bain and McKinsey, their benchmarking gets you to the same place as your competitors, right? And whereas if you double down on what they're not good at, it gives you a significant competitive advantage. And
That
that's differentiation. It's an easy problem. You don't need to go. You don't need to bring your MSP staff to the best MSP in town to find out where the opportunity is. It's in how they show up in the market, for sure. Yeah.
that's really fascinating. I think the lesson learned there is more beer, craft beer. So differentiation in a crowded market and trying to compete, like New York City restaurants, kind of like the top tier of
Yes.
restaurants, other than like maybe Vegas or something,
Okay.
but very high
Yeah.
in the spectrum of restaurants. So very admirable to go take a risk, I would say.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what you're pitching to MSPs is to put yourself out there in what may not mesh well with your left brain logicalness and take a risk.
Yeah, and I suppose it's not even take a risk. It's more, it's what we would we when we work with an MSP, right? We will research all of their competitors. So we've researched many dozens of MSPs in Ireland, the UK, the US, and it's astonishing how they look and sound the same, and it's all a race to who has the most accreditations with Microsoft or IBM or Broadcom or whoever it is, right? And uh, and that's, I suppose, that's where the big opportunity lies, is to differentiate. So it's not necessarily risky. It's just to show up in a way that's true to you, true to your MSP, how you do business, that's appealing to the market, and that's different from your competition.
Are there any recommendations you have on showing up differently, like breaking away from the uniformity people see?
Yeah, well, we have a process. We have a process that enables companies to do it. It's not easy. That's like it's the job of what's called a brand strategist, and they start with a kind of um, a three-step process where they look at segmentation, like what segment of the market you're going after, what companies within that segment you
Ki-
want to target, and then positioning. And the positioning is where the three things that I mentioned earlier come together. So who you're for, what you're good at, and how you're different from the competitors, and that's the foundation. That's your marketing or your growth foundation. And when you build that and you have a differentiated point of view, that enables everything else to happen. So it enables how you show up in the market then in a way that's true to you and different from the competitors and appealing to the market.
So do you think there's any type of mind shift that is necessary to make those moves, or is it just reading it and trying it?
So to do it well, you need a specialist to do it right. So, but what the MSPs that we work with, they typically start the journey with a commitment, right? So that commitment can
Mm.
come from an event that happens in the company. So it could be a strategic move, or it could be they've taken investment from a private equity company, or they've acquired some other organizations, or it could be a management buyout. So there's this concerted kind of realization within the organization, and they typically they're quite honest and they put their hands up and they go like we don't really know how to approach this particular problem, and that's where they get in touch with a company like us, and we can help them with that, to go on that journey. Um,
So there's usually like an event, perhaps
yes,
so some acquisition, some major tech change, perhaps that kind of spurns this like, oh, I'm in over my head feeling,
exactly.
and then they're like, Ian, help.
Yeah, yeah. Or they might just have this kind of, because I suppose they're typically I'm speaking generally here. There isn't someone within the organization that has the skill set to be able to solve this problem. And what can happen is that they know there's something wrong. They can't put their finger on what it is, and they might phrase it like, I was on to a CEO of a large MSP a few weeks ago. He was saying, "I don't know what I want to find out what we're going to be famous for." Or they might say, we do great work, we just don't come across like that in the market, like our website doesn't, and they just don't know how to go about it. And they try things, but because they don't know how to build that foundational layer, it can be challenging.
So I want to jump into kind of a how, not necessarily like a roadmap, steps. We don't want to give away the secret sauce of Square, not
Yeah.
necessarily, but I wanted to broach the subject of AI in marketing,
Okay.
and I wanted to just begin that with a story. Like I or the guests on this show always mention AI,
Okay.
so I'm going to shoot for it this time. But AI in marketing is pretty powerful. So I work in marketing now. I come from like a tech background, and I am not the best writer. I'm not the best, at researching, but I am really good at like scratching notes down and like organizing things after they are presented to me.
Okay.
So, in preparation for this interview with Ian, so we've never met in person. We've, looked at each other on LinkedIn and chatted back and forth briefly, maybe a couple of emails. And I gave you some questions before
Yeah.
this. And your response to me was, wow, you've really done your homework. So these are really good questions based on Ian's, presence on LinkedIn and a few other social platforms. So what I did is and I didn't tell you this beforehand because I want to get your live
Okay.
reaction. So I did watch some of your videos. I took some very rough notes about some of the things you had mentioned. And then I fed that into AI to say, take these notes and what you can find about Ian Blake on the web and generate some questions. And I did tune them a little bit because some of them were kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous, but it was very helpful. And you were like, wow, really great job. And it's not like, I guess it's kind of cheating, but it was good output from the AI with the human grooming the stuff. So what do you think about AI's role in marketing strategy?
So yeah, I think it's it can be very valuable if it's used the right way, by uh, used in the right way, and going back to the Sea of Sameness, right? And to my kind of foundational layer, right? So if you take an MSP, for example, that haven't built that foundational layer, and an MSP that's guilty, like the other 90% of MSPs, of living in that Sea of Sameness, where AI will just magnify that and turn it into an
Mm-hmm.
ocean of uniformity, right? So, which actually presents an even bigger opportunity for the MSPs brave enough to go on that journey and find a differentiation, a point of difference, something to stand for in the market. And when you have that foundational layer, and you use AI, the AI just magnifies that point of difference. And you can create really good ads on the back of it, and you can create really good content on the back of it, because you're feeding the AI the right thing, because, but if you're the same as everybody else is feeding the AI the same stuff,
Yeah. So the AI, I mean, it's essentially just kind of regurgitating the average of the internet.
exactly,
And in what your whole pitch is like, you have to not do that,
100%.
but you can kind of tune AI to be your uniqueness. So you have to figure out that uniqueness. And like you said, some MSPs have a hard time putting their finger on what that uniqueness is. What's going to make me famous, you said.
Exactly.
So you have to feed in that uniqueness to the AI. And I'm curious, like, what tools would you recommend? Like those AI tools that you kind of lean on heavily. Which ones are those?
Yeah, ones we use ourselves. It's mostly to help with. Well, it can help with a lot with research. So the ChatGPT, is it the 1.0, the one that the deep research tool? Um,
Oh, one.
it has deep research on the underneath the search bar. That's really good for researching, which is hugely important in that kind of foundational layer. And also segmentation and targeting. You can get it to help you with, you can feed it a database, and it can come up with ways of weighting that database, or helping you think through, well, if we're going after a particular if we're targeting a particular segment of the market, what's the revenue, what's the number of employees, where do we want them to be based, etc. And it can really, speed up that process. So that's one tool that we would use, and we would use it for that. And then content creation, and you, again, in the right hands. So if you want to get something written, or get you started on writing something, or coming up with a list of pieces of content, whether it's LinkedIn posts or blog posts, or let's say an ebook or video ideas. You can feed, like, and Claude is very good for this, and they have a project. You can create a project within Claude, and you can feed on the right hand panel all of the documentation required. So it could be the tone of voice document, the brand document, your point of differentiation, pain points of your target audience, and those documents live in the project. And then if you would prompt it then, to provide you with whatever it is that you want, whether it's LinkedIn posts, let's say. So I have a project for LinkedIn posts, and but I have all of the information down the right in the repository that's there, and you get to know how to use it. And prompting, I think, also in AI. not being lazy about your prompt. So other advice I give is and look, forgive me if your audience know this already, but like the more context that an AI has about what you're trying to get out of it, the better. So I always ask it to act like a B2B tech writer, or act like a brand strategist, or act like whatever, and and I want you to do, the following, and give it as much information as possible. Um, and then,
Yes.
iterate on that thereafter, and all, and massive thing is quality checking. Like, oh my God, you really need to quality check.
Especially if there's like links.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. So you can really, and like, so that email that you sent me, I wasn't naturally inclined to think you had used AI. I went, oh, I just went, because you had made those tweets, which you owned up there to there 5 minutes ago, So uh,
Well, I didn't do it 5 minutes ago, but so like it still worked. Like
yeah,
what Ian is saying, and what the example that I gave was still work to do, but instead of taking 2 hours, it took 30 minutes
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
And the output was good. But I like what you were saying. You're kind of saying use the deep research tools. There's OpenAI has one, and also Google Gemini has one, which I think the Gemini one is free currently. I guess they're falling behind in market share, so they're giving it away for free.
okay,
And then you're saying kind of take that deep research, make sure it's accurate and includes your uniqueness, and then kind of feed that into like a writer and give that writer AI a role.
exactly,
And the Claude, like you mentioned, is really good at writing great messaging and plans, I guess you could say.
exactly,
But yeah, you're kind of using the strengths of each tool. And tool is the key word here. Like AI is just another tool like any other,
yeah,
but you're using them in a way that produces a good output for you and your business.
exactly.
I'm curious, you did mention ads in there. So do you and your team use any AI image generators or anything like that for advertisements?
No, because we haven't found one good enough yet. So we've tried them, but they're
Yeah.
terrible. They're really, really bad. So yeah, at the moment anyway, they're improving. They're improving. I saw an interview with, I don't know if you're familiar with Mo Gadot. He's an Egyptian ex Google guy, and very prevalent on different podcasts talking about AI. And he was just talking about the fact that AI is doubling in its power every 5 months. So you can even see it, But at the moment, for image generation, certainly the image generation that we're trying to do, uh, it hasn't been
Yeah.
good. And you'd also need, people who think that they can create images using AI that are uh,
Production ready,
yeah,
perhaps.
and reflective of the brand, right, which is really important. And the you need a proper designer to be able to liaise with or prompt AI to be able to get you the quality that you need. If you're interested in getting your brand as famous as possible in your target market. Um, yeah,
Yeah, the AI image tools in the hands of a real graphic designer are it's pretty impressive
yeah,
work. We've actually excuse me, we've used some image generation and then run it through like video generators
okay,
to create ad videos, which are, good. A video person could have done way better. An
okay,
animator could have done way better,
okay,
but usable.
yeah, yeah.
So it's yeah, like you said, it's getting close. Not quite there yet.
I don't think we're too far away.
But I totally agree. But I am curious to like the steps to get to this kind of new market space. So like what you're trying to do is to get the MSP into thinking differently, to be have their uniqueness come through. Like what are some of the questions perhaps you would pepper them with to draw out
That's yeah.
that
So that's a very good.
uniqueness?
That's a very good question. So yeah, a lot of what we do is asking questions that may not have been posed before, right? So to get them to a place, or to get us to a place where we can come back with a hypothesis of how you should, show up in the market now. We understand the following. So who you're for, the problem you solve, what you deliver, why it matters, why it's hard, and how you're different. And they're typically, six questions that we would go through. Not only with the senior leadership team of the organization, but also customers, and non-customers and employees within the organization. Um, and with the customers or with the buyer, it's quite you get a lot of really good insights from the buyer, which is I think for most businesses, right? They have customers and they talk to customers, but you're very much, I suppose, it's in-game activity. You're talking to them about what you're selling them at that time or the problem, but you're not asking kind of deep strategic questions, right? So, things that we would ask a buyer or a potential buyer, we have a framework called pains, gains, and jobs to be done. So we're trying to understand the pains that your buyer is trying to solve, the gains they're trying to make by solving those pains, and the jobs to be done. What are they doing to get to achieve that end goal? And there, we find it a very good framework to be able to crystallize, the buyer, and help our MSP clients then show up for that buyer. Yeah.
I think that was pretty powerful. So you kind of laid out, was that six questions you would ask the MSP?
Yes. Yeah.
Whatever they were. I'll rewind the transcript and
No
I'll
worries.
pluck those out for the inevitable LinkedIn post for this.
Yeah.
So you would pepper the MSP, perhaps their executive team, some of their staff, maybe their board, whoever, and get answers to those questions. Like I'm thinking of like an internal survey, like, hey, everyone, answer these questions, and then comb through those. What are you saying? And then you're saying slightly different questions for their
Yeah.
customers and to see what their customers say. And I imagine there's like a process like, do these
Yeah.
match or are they totally different? And then who wins in that
Yeah. So
situation?
I'll give you an example, if that would help, of a client that we've done this for. So ultimately, what this process is trying to get to is an insight or insights that is true to the MSP, true to the buyer, and different from the competition, or an insight that will inform that, right? So one of our clients was or is a large Irish MSP Microsoft partner, and they play in the enterprise and government space. And where from this process, we like interviewing the market and talking to the people within the organization, we found that that in the market, the IT buyer was saying that typically IT projects go over time and over budget. And I'm sick of projects not delivering impact, right? Which isn't unusual. Like if you ask most buyers, they're going to say that, right? But when we found out our client was good at was delivering on time and on budget, and in some instances over delivering. So coming in, before the due date, or less than budget. So the positioning that we came up with for this particular client was impact delivered. That became the tagline. That was a whole load of stuff, a bit like the iceberg underneath that. But that kind of impact delivered was the statement that we came up with for this client. And then everything that flowed from that, made sense. So any content they write is about delivering impact. They can write ebooks on it, and call out when call out kind of continue to call out issues in the IT world. But it gives them that something to stand for. Gives the organization energy. They can rally around this particular thing. So that's yeah, that's just an example of of how the insight then becomes. And again, if you compare it to a lot of what the language that we would see in the MSP space, like your IT, cybersecurity, and compliance partner, or cloud technology for modern businesses, like they all say that this is completely different, but it's of the category. Like it's not, they're not trying to be like Red Bull. It's of the category, but it's appealing to the buyer. Um,
Yeah, what you do may be similar to others in the space, but who you are is almost always different.
and how you do it, how you do it is different, right?
Hmm.
So this, delivering impact, even in how they manage projects, it was something that they were really passionate about. It was less about trouble ticket raising and patching and that kind of stuff, which is fine for someone else, but for these guys it was kind of deep craftsmanship and that delivering impact at every point of their projects.
So you mentioned the word in there, the word
Oh
ebook.
yeah,
So you were saying you gather these insights, and then from those insights, you could develop an ebook. So in the last little bit, you said perhaps this MSP writes an ebook about the strategy of their
yeah,
process and how that helps them and why it would work for you, blah blah blah. So other people can get benefit from reading this ebook, not necessarily, hey, call us to be your MSP, but like get value from it. In the marketing biz, we would call something like an ebook a lead
yeah,
magnet.
yeah.
So like, are there other like lead magnet assets that you kind of recommend, or does it kind of depend? What's your story
Yeah,
there?
so like again, we're getting into tactics now, and once you've got that foundation built, the tactics become very easy to create. So another client of ours are they're in the MSP space, but their deep subject matter expertise on infrastructure is where they play, right? So they provide infrastructure. Um, uh, Consulting and project delivery for large enterprise clients. And part of that infrastructure work, or that infrastructure work, gives them the ability to deliver cyber recovery solutions for
Hmm.
clients. So we've recently done uh, sizable enough campaign for them where their subject matter expertise around cyber recovery was videoed. So we videoed their experts talking about the importance of cyber recovery and how cyber recovery is distinctively different from cyber security, and then and how they go about it, because it's quite nuanced. Um, and believe it or not, like from the research, it became apparent that the that decision makers within IT weren't 100% sure about the difference between cyber recovery and cyber security. They thought they were covered with cyber security, but that cyber recovery is another layer on top of that. So it was a real education piece. But again, it was linked to their what they stand for in the market, and that enabled us to come up with that kind of concept quite quickly, because it was true to them.
I can just see you and your team like asking these questions, and that cyber recovery topic comes up, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't hear this
Yeah,
often.
exactly.
So like, let's double click, as they say, onto that.
Absolutely.
And they're like, oh yeah, like, we do this and that. So like, they're like, yeah, your cybersecurity is like taken care of. We do not want to have to use the cyber recovery methods that we have. But if we do, and there's, it's happens every day. You can pull up a story right now, type in cyber breach into Google, and you'll see something that happened
Yeah,
yesterday about a company, a government, an MSP, or whatever. Like that is a really good differentiator there, and something that probably people don't call
yeah,
out, and that you kind of plucked out of their strategy discussion into now to become a tactic of
exactly.
theirs.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, how do you? Are they pretty readily going forward with these tactics that you suggest? So you're like, okay, you told me all this stuff. Um, we think X, Y, and Z are great tactics for you. Do you ever get pushback in that space?
Not necessarily. No, with a lot of these clients, we would have built their foundation, so we're you know extremely familiar with their business, extremely familiar with what they stand for. We would have given them the thing that we recommend that they stand for, so we've built their brand, we've built their website, and we work with them on an ongoing basis. So we get to know them intimately, get to know their business intimately. And typically at the beginning of a year, beginning of a quarter, they would have things that they want to achieve, or a new offer that they want to go to the market with. And then because we have the that foundational layer, we're able to kind of move quite quickly because we can get our strategists to link the foundational layer with this new offer or new product, or it could be a piece of marketing development fund from Microsoft or IBM that they have, and they want to do something with it. But again, linking it back to that to their foundational position.
To their core differentiator.
Exactly.
So we touched a bit on when we were talking about AI and deep research that you can identify your ideal
Mm,
clients like for the MSP.
mm.
Um, I'm curious, like, why is that so important?
Um, the it's quite segmentation. Well, targeting in particular is probably the most strategic part of your brand strategy or your marketing strategy, right? So the three things, it's called the holy trinity of marketing: segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And the reason it's so strategic is that it helps you decide what not to do, because unfortunately nobody has unlimited budgets. Well, maybe Amazon or Microsoft do, right? But typically MSPs will have limited resources, and you want to be able to point your uh, your efforts in a direction that is going to be as effective as possible. So, go back to your question about AI and how it helps with segmentation and targeting. Well, if you're able to feed AI a database of 5,000 professional services firms in the northeast of the US, right? And you feed it in your customer base, and within your customer base you have how profitable different customers are, the type of products that they have, what issues they typically have, how much time they take from you and your team, etc. And if you're able to prompt it well enough, it can come back. Like this work would take weeks of a researcher to do. Going through Excel spreadsheets with a fine tooth comb. You can feed all
Yeah.
that into ChatGPT and get it back. It could be days of work as opposed to weeks of work. Sometimes it can get a little bit frustrating. It can forget where it was. I don't know if you've noticed that. You kind of
Oh
have to
yeah.
wake it up every now and again and say, "Wait, where were you with that segmentation?" But if you manage to stay on it, yeah, it's like they're like teenage boys, not doing their homework sometimes,
Wrecking cars and drinking
yeah,
beer.
and, and they and then they come back all kind of all flustered, with a whole load of work, but yeah, it's sorry, I don't know, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but does that answer your question about how it
Yeah,
helps?
yeah, absolutely. So the segmenting is important because of the MSP's limited budget. And this isn't just the case for MSPs. This is every business.
100%,
Like
yeah.
you have to pinpoint who your top customers are and then essentially find like lookalike companies and go after them. Now, once you are really good at that, then you can maybe broaden your scope a
Oh,
bit.
100%. Yeah. But even bigger MSP, like typically we would work with MSPs that have a turnover of between 10 million and 400 million. And even within those organizations, like we're working with a 400 million euro organization at the moment, and for their SME segment, we're finding targeting within that segment that's going to be easier for them to sell to. When you know the criteria, um, it's a soft center. It's like, where's the soft center in this segment, and how can we become intensely appealing to that soft center and make some easier sales that are more profitable than the
Absolutely.
others. Yeah,
So let's craft like a hypothetical situation. Let's say the MSP doesn't have budget to do anything very expensive. They don't have the budget to hire Ian and team. They don't have the budget to do like Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads. What are some like very quick, practical tips that we could give them to help them get more work on the strategy and then get tactical?
yeah. So I would say it depends on the size of the MSP. So an MSP would say between half a million and three, even $4 million in revenue.
Which is a vast
Vast
majority of
majority. Yeah,
MSPs.
they're still kind of um, they have to be what I say I'll call of the category, right? They're probably too early to make that leap, that differentiated leap, right? So there's nothing wrong with them engaging in tactical activities. So it's kind of old school hand to hand combat. Using the tools available to them like email, LinkedIn, on a tactical perspective. There's nothing wrong with them being strategic, where in terms of segmentation and targeting, where what segment of the market do we want to go after, and then who we target. So let's say you have a kind of a $2.5 million MSP, and they have a lot of experience in the legal. That they over-index in the legal world, right? Without knowing anything else about them, I would recommend that they double down on targeting more law firms, with with an offer to get in front of as many more law firms as they possibly can, because they have a story to tell. When they get into the sales conversation, they can talk with confidence about how they've delivered for the other 20 law firms, and they'll be familiar with the challenges that the
Yeah.
law firm has, whether it's around data or compliance or automation or whatever it is, and they'll have stories to tell, not unlike the stories I have to tell around the MSP world.
Yeah.
It just makes it easier. So that's what I would recommend. The quick wins from a strategic perspective, and I wouldn't ignore positioning, because if you can figure out a way, to show up in the market that, as I say, is differentiated from your competition, well, that would be something I would do as well. Yeah,
Yeah, you mentioned also, just to call out, you kind of mentioned speak the language of your target audience in there,
yeah,
which I thought was really, really good.
yeah. But then as you
So, Ian, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, then as you move up through the kind of the sizes, like once you go beyond 5 million, MSPs need to really, the biggest opportunity for them is differentiation. And anything over 5 million, and these guys will have the budget, to engage with someone like us to do differentiation strategy, and then show up in the market, with messaging that that's put out into the market on a consistent basis, and then that compounds over time. And you get famous for the right reasons in the right circles, and all of a sudden people start ringing you and asking you to be on podcasts and stuff.
That's how it goes.
Absolutely, yeah,
Well, Ian, uh, thank you so much for coming on and enlightening us a little bit about, some strategy and some tactics for the MSP marketing. I think it's a place where MSPs struggle a lot, and it's good to see that you're out there and you're giving knowledge away freely. So I really appreciate that. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
So my email address is ian@squaredot.agency. I'm very active on LinkedIn, And my LinkedIn handle is, tell you now.
It's Ian Blake and the number one.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Thanks for your help there, Mike.
You're like, yeah, that's it.
It's like, what is this?
You'll recognize the handsome bald fella in the picture.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, and
Well,
website is www.squaredop.agency.
awesome. Well, thank you, Ian. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you, Mikey.